Now, ladies and gentlemen, as most of you know, I am the merchant of positive news in South Africa. The issue is that there's no positive things happening in the country, and the Springboks didn't play this weekend, so, well, I have to work with what is given me. Now, despite the best efforts of the media to try and spin something into a positive, I'm again going to show you why the media should not be trusted in this country, and more importantly, why economists and their biases may actually be far more dangerous than what people think. We're going to do some economics. That's just how it is. I love economics. I love talking about it, and I love thinking about it. But we're also going to talk about some really bad things that is about to happen to South Africa, and how those bad things are actually going to spiral into a lot more bad things that will be happening in the very near term. BizTech on the 11th released this article. I read it and I thought, what the hell are they on about? Then I actually read the fullness of the article and I saw, oh, this is just spin. So the headline here is "The tide is turning in South Africa." And if you read that and you see the picture of Ramaphosa holding up both thumbs and basically just before he goes, who has two thumbs and doesn't give a crap, this guy, but they didn't show that, which would have actually been perfect. You would think, wow, okay, so something good is actually starting to happen. We just had South Africa, or the ANC, release their 10-point plan, about 4 of which, by the way, is straight out of Soviet Russia. So central planning and communism coming your way fast. And you would think, wow, this is actually good news. The Rand is doing well. Well, actually, no, the Rand isn't doing that well. It actually started to dip on Friday. And the only thing that is currently keeping the Rand in check is commodity prices. Commodity prices have been soaring. Should those commodity prices fall off, the South African Rand will once again start to dip rather quickly. But okay, so let's get into this. The article, of course, speaks to an economist called Kevin Lings. He is the chief economist of Stanlib. Stanlib, of course, is an investment company, and they have a number of trust funds, or funds, unit trusts, I should say, that you can invest in with a number of shares all around the world, including some in South Africa. I mention this because it's important to understand the biases with which people speak. If you're an economist working for an investment firm that has vested interests in South Africa, that economist is most likely going to spin whatever information comes his way in such a way that it favors the investment environment in which his company operates. But okay, so a detailed breakdown of the tax revenue data reveals that individual income tax has risen by a respectable 8.4% year on year in the first 5 months of the tax year, while corporate tax collection has increased by 6.9%. Importantly, VAT receipts are up a substantial 11.4% year on year, helped by a drop in VAT refunds. So, in other words, SARS is not doing its job by offering VAT refunds to companies that deserve it, and therefore they're collecting more VAT. Well, who knew? If you don't give money back to people you owe, and you just keep taking money, well, generally speaking, you will make more money. That's kind of how that works. It would be sort of like me saying, well, actually, my budget for the year is looking very well since I stopped paying the bank for my house and my car. Sure, I am making more money, or at least I have more money in my pocket, but that money doesn't really belong to me now, does it? The other problem, of course, here, and I won't take you through the whole article because it is just Lings effectively spinning all of this data into a massive positive, effectively saying things like the corporate taxes exceeding expectations, individual taxes being up, shows that the country might actually meet its fiscal demands and could actually consolidate the fiscal needs of the country, meaning we'd be able to get as much money as we spend. But it should also be mentioned that government budget spending has not yet been made public as a result of the delayed budget that happened earlier in the year. So we're not entirely sure how much money the government has spent as of yet, although according to some indications, the government is as of yet underspending in the budget, but there's still a lot of years left. There's still a lot of Mercedes and BMWs to buy. So I'm sure that number will disappear in due time. It's important to note that the ANC have spent the last few years mainly fighting for survival and having to pretend like they actually care with all sorts of indabas and all sort of lachotlas and all manner of meetings between municipal managers and the NEC in order to basically rescue what one could call a sinking ship. The entirety of this article is effectively Kevin Lings saying that this is all amazingly great, and the fact that SARS is actually getting more taxes out of the people shows that the country is, at least on that front, doing relatively well. He does mention that this is still not great because economic growth is still under 1%. In fact, we now have a number that suggests that economic growth might be anywhere from 0.2% to 0.8%. So we may actually see the lowest economic growth that we have seen in probably the last few decades of South Africa. So not good at all. And the reason it's important to understand where someone like Kevin Lings comes from and why I showed you Stanlib, the company or the corporation that he works for, is because the health of an economy rests on four main pillars. The first is birth. How many people are you adding to your economy? Now, there's a number of reasons for that, but mainly you can think of it like this. Between the ages of 0 and 25, people are not contributing to the economy. Society is contributing to the people. From about 25 to 45, the people contribute the most to the economy. This is where people will start working, buying cars, houses, go on holidays and vacations, and buy stuff effectively, which is great for an economy. From about 45 to 65, people enter what is called the teaching economy, where they will now sort of pass down the skills and the knowledge that they have accrued. They'll start making very big economic investments, like starting their own businesses or investing in other businesses, but they won't be economically as active. They don't buy as much. They don't spend as much on new cars and homes and stuff like that. And then from the age of 65, they become a net drain on the system again, because very few 60 or 70-year-olds are starting businesses, right? So you want that group that precedes the following group to always be bigger than the group that it precedes. That's how good economics works. So that's the first pillar. The second pillar is unemployment. You want unemployment. Sorry about that. I was very rudely interrupted by a sales call from FNB, my bank. It is my bank. I bank with FNB, but they phoned me to find out if I would like an account with FNB. This is an aside, but I am sick and tired of the sales calls in this country. Literally 4 or 5 times a day, my phone will ring with people wanting to sell me obscene crap that I do not want. FNB, all of the banks, we need a way to solve this. Sorry, guys. I'm just really annoyed. Okay, as I was saying, with unemployment, you want some unemployment. Not high, but you do need some unemployment. If you had zero unemployment in a country, there would be no new businesses, no economic growth, because there's literally no workers to give jobs to. So that would be really bad. So usually about between 4 and 6% unemployment is a good one. Too high, really, really bad. Too low, really, really bad. So that's sort of the sweet spot. Then you have inflation. Inflation numbers are super important. High inflation, really bad. No inflation, really bad. You want some inflation, right? And then you have economic growth, probably arguably the most important of all of those factors. And the reason for it is economic growth offsets or completely replaces most of those factors. So, for example, if you have 2.3% inflation, but you have 2.3% economic growth, you essentially have 0% inflation, because the economy is still growing at the same rate as inflation, and therefore prices aren't really going to go up because people are producing more, buying more, have more money to spend, more jobs are being created, meaning you have more people that can buy the stuff that is being made. So prices are arguably almost always going to come down. That's sort of the box standard approach. South Africa, on every single one of those except for one, fails miserably. We have very high inflation, sitting just over 3%, almost 4%, but that is the government's inflation. That's not real inflation. Real inflation sits probably closer to about 5-6% in South Africa. That is year on year, so it is cumulative and exponential in that way. But then more importantly, we sit with an economic growth of between 0.2 and 0.8%, meaning our inflation just does lead to prices getting higher and higher over time. We have a birth rate of about 1.6, meaning we are growing incredibly well in this country. Our country's sort of growth, population growth is 1.6%. Birth rate is actually higher, excuse me. But our birth rate is about 1.6, or our growth rate is about 1.6%. If you have an economic growth of under 1%, but a birth rate of over 1%, you actually have to subtract the birth rate from the economic growth. And so we're actually growing at a negative rate in our country. And of course, without economic growth, you have no employment. There's just no jobs actually being created. So the entire article here from BizTech and from Kevin Lings is just complete and utter nonsense. All the South African government has been able to do has been to increase the amount of money that they're taking out of the economy without actually increasing the amount of money that they're allowing to be created within the economy. And as a result of this, yes, the fiscus might look very, very good, but ordinary South Africans are suffering more and more as SARS continues to take what little money they actually have in order to allow the government to consolidate their incredible debt burdens. And then it's actually made far worse if you realize that the EU has now proposed a 50% import tariff on all steel and iron products. The EU, by the way, combined is South Africa's second largest steel partner, with about 20 billion or so rand going from South Africa into the EU as an economic bloc. Just about 5 billion behind China. And it should be mentioned that China is only really doing this in order to help South Africa because China produces most of its own steel as well as its own steel products. And one of the big problems, of course, in South Africa is that we are currently experiencing a massive dump of steel products. Now, you have the actual Steel Institute, the South African Iron and Steel Institute, saying that they've been speaking to the government for months, asking them to protect local producers against the dumping of steel products, mainly from China, in South Africa. The issue, of course, here is that should the government, because the government is looking at applying import tariffs of their own, but should the government do this, South African producers will now be stuck with very expensive South African steel. And why is it so expensive? Once again, government failures. There is no rail work. There is no electricity. The electricity that there is incredibly expensive. Trade and labor relationships in this country are absolutely bonkers. As a result of this, everything produced in this country is produced at a far higher price than what it needs to be produced at for us to be in any way, shape, or form competitive with the rest of the world. So if the government were to step in and apply import tariffs, it'll just make everything more expensive that is made with stainless steel or with iron in this regard. And that, of course, doesn't speak to the fact that America, with all of their tariffs, I warned a few months ago, will trigger the rest of the world to also start applying tariffs. Globalization is over. The ANC seems to be the only government still thinking that globalization is an ideal that they can hold fast to. The rest of the world is closing shop. Everyone is starting to look at their own economies as the Western, more advanced economies of the world finally started to realize that if you export all of the actual work of your economy to other nations, well, your own economy does start to suffer, dwindle, and eventually die. That's where Europe is now. So Europe is going to start protecting itself the same way that America is. If we lose Europe to a number of import tariffs, and we've already lost America to import tariffs very quickly, South Africa will find itself in a world where it cannot compete with the rest of the world due to local factors. It cannot compete with the rest of the world due to external factors. So who the hell are we supposed to compete with? China? Russia? Do you really think China and Russia has any interest in helping South Africa become a superpower? No, of course not. Ladies and gentlemen, it is bad news all the way down, and it is lovely to start a Monday on such a high note. But that is the news. That is the reality on the ground. And as always, hit the like if you liked, the dislike if you didn't. Let me know in the comment section down below what you foresee for the future of our country. Massive shout out and thank you to all of the patrons as well as the YouTube channel members for continuing to support this channel and providing me with the means to bring you more and more news. As always, be good to each other, be kind to each other, and I will see all of you in the next one. Peace.